Welcome back to this series about the Book of Wisdom or Wisdom of Solomon. Today we're going to read together chapter 2 of the Book of Wisdom. So let's get into it. We had left chapter 1 with a mention of the wicked or the unrighteous. And so the unrighteous are the protagonists of the entire chapter 2, which is a very remarkable chapter because it speaks with a voice that sounds like the voice of somebody who wrote or said that yesterday in 2023. In other words, take many of the references and quotes from the atheistic, materialistic, modern thinkers, and you will find that they are very well represented, very precisely represented in this chapter 2 of the Wisdom of Solomon. And our author, the author of the Book of Wisdom, considers these theories, these nihilistic theories, as intellectually weak. So let's see what these theories are. For not thinking rightly, they said among themselves, brief and troubled is our lifetime. There is no remedy for our dying, nor is anyone known to have come back from Hades. For by mere chance we were born. By mere chance we were born is a clear echo of the Ecclesiastes or Qoheleth, the book which is almost a confutatis inside the Old Testament. The author of the Book of Wisdom must have known because it's an older book in the Old Testament. For by mere chance we were born, and hereafter we shall be as though we had not been, because the breath in our nostrils is smoke, and reason a spark from the beating of our hearts. And when this is quenched, our body will be ashes, and our spirit will be poured abroad like empty air. Very, very interesting, the fact that he's talking about empty air, he's talking about smoke, because if we remember from the Qoheleth, from Ecclesiastes, the constant repetition of the word vanity, vanity of vanity, everything is vanity. The ancient Hebrew term that's been translated into vanity doesn't literally translate into vanity, but into something like breath or vapor or smoke. So this is really what our pseudo Solomon is referencing here. Even our name will be forgotten in time, and no one will recall our deeds. So our life will pass away like the traces of a cloud, and will be dispersed like a mist, pursued by the sun's rays and overpowered by its heat. For our lifetime is the passing of a shadow, and our dying cannot be deferred because it's fixed with a seal, and no one returns. There are so many echoes of nihilism, as I mentioned in the beginning, and some of our modern materialism as well, that develops then and kind of as a natural consequence goes into an hedonism, which is taking the most pleasure for life. So it's not a coincidence that towards the end of chapter 2, the author of the Book of Wisdom gets to the same point, the same conclusion that so many modern thinkers and modern people who are not necessarily philosophers get to. In fact, here he goes. Come therefore, let us enjoy the good things that are there, and make use of creation with youthful zest. Let us have our fill of costly wine and perfumes, and let no springtime blossom pass us by. Let us crown ourselves with rosebuds before they wither. This is really, really, really interesting because it's almost a manual definition of hedonism. Let's take as much pleasure from life as possible because life is short. There's nothing before, there's nothing after, and therefore we have to maximize the pleasure in this life and minimize the pain. That's the only goal that we have to on earth as human beings. Now, Solomon, or the pseudo Solomon, thinks that this is a very intellectually weak position because, among other reasons, it really contrasts and denies the traditional concept of freedom. What is freedom? In today's world, for a majority of people who are secular, materialistic, freedom means to do whatever pleases me, especially in this society of teenagers where we live. Teenagers meaning even 50 or 60 years old teenagers. Freedom equals the ability to do whatever I like, whatever pleases me. While for centuries and centuries, freedom in a traditional Christian way and religious way or meaning has really been used with a very different meaning, which is the ability to become the best versions of ourselves, the ability to become saints, therefore, without any impediment. And that's a little bit different. But this type of view, existential view, doesn't only take us necessarily to an hedonistic type of philosophy where we seek pleasure in everything. It goes even in a darker place, and that's what the next lines are highlighting here. Let no meadow be free from our wantonness. Everywhere let us leave tokens of our merriment, for this is our portion, and this is our lot. Let us oppress the righteous poor. Let us neither spare the widow, nor revere the aged, for hair grown white with time. The widows and the aged, the elderlies, were and have always been some of the defenseless parts of society. So what are we hearing here? We are hearing the fact that a constant putting pleasure as the main goal of our life, or the sole goal of our life, to seek pleasure as the highest mission in our existence, not only means to become nihilists and materialists, but also to warp our values so that even the people around us don't really matter for what they are, for creatures of God and people and human beings with a value in their own. Only strength and power and our merry youth matter. That's the only thing that matters. Therefore, if somebody needs help, needs some kind of care and compassion, why should I bother with that if it doesn't really align with my goals? Here I'm going to read a brief quote from an American theologian that I really love. His name is Peter Kreeft. And here in this book called Food for the Soul, he says, "No one in history has ever written a more profoundly false line about heaven and hell than the atheist Jean-Paul Sartre, who in his play about hell entitled No Exit, famously wrote that hell is other people. No, Sartre, the real heaven is what you think is your hell, the presence of other people, and the real hell is what you think is your heaven, the absence of other people, both human and divine, your own total independence and autonomy and aloneness." And here we come to the center of this dark ideology. "But let our strength be our norm of righteousness, for weakness prove itself useless." Let our strength be our norm of righteousness, our strength. Weakness is nothing, strength is everything. Almost reminds us of Nietzsche and the will to power, right? If we think about another wisdom book, which is the Book of Sirach, in the Book of Sirach, for example, the concept of joy for a human being, is to look, to constantly seek wisdom, to search for wisdom and cultivate wisdom in our life. For this type of wicked and unrighteous people described here, joy is seeking pleasure, squeezing everything that is possible out of life from a materialistic point of view. The author here is probably speaking about some members of the Hebrew community in Alexandria who had apostatized or were not righteous, they were not pious anymore, but still has some form of power. And therefore, we're acting and living in a very different way from the traditional Jewish people and following a different philosophy. Let us lie in wait for the righteous one, because he is annoying to us. The righteous one has some type of messianic tones. He opposes our actions, reproaches us for transgressions of the law, the Mosaic law, and charges us with violations of our training. He professes to have knowledge of God and styles himself as child of the Lord. In the Old Testament, the child of the Lord is usually Israel, the chosen people. To us, he is the censor of our thoughts. Merely to see him is a hardship to us, because his life is not like that of others, and different are his ways. He judges us debased. He holds aloof from our paths and from things impure. He calls blessed the destiny of the righteous and boasts that God is his Father. This monologue, as we can call it, concludes with a dare to the righteous person. In fact, a violent dare, because if he's the righteous one, God will help him and deliver him, with violence and torture, let us put him to the test. We want to test him. If it's true, that we may have proof of his gentleness and try his patience. So isn't it remarkable that even before any type of scientific, even before science was even invented, in pre-scientific times, the same exact arguments were appearing in the Hebrew community and among Christians and non-Christians, or Jewish and non-Jewish. This argument is the same that today is made by some scientists. I'm thinking of Richard Dawkins, for example, where he says, okay, where is the evidence of God? Misunderstanding and completely misplacing the concept of God into a flat scientific level. Give me scientific evidence of God, otherwise I don't believe it. These people are saying exactly the same things. Let us condemn him to a shameful death, for according to his own words, God will take care of him. And finally, the author concludes with his own comments about this type of philosophical or ideological positions, saying these were their thoughts, but they erred, for their wickedness blinded them, and they did not know the hidden counsels of God, for God formed us to be imperishable. The image of his own nature he made us. Here the author is highlighting the spiritual nature and the eternal nature of our souls. But by the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and they who are allied with him experience it. This is the end of chapter 2. I find this chapter simply outstanding because it really sounds like somebody who is having an argument, or two people who are having an argument today, again in 2023. On one hand, there is the traditional, the pious, the religious, the faithful, and on the other hand, there is the materialistic, hedonistic, nihilistic person who is arguing with exactly the same matters and topics that were used to argue 2,000 years ago. And it's fascinating to see that it's a constant debate, and it's so powerful that the author of the Book of Wisdom decided to start the book with this, to begin with these very powerful arguments, because these are the two fundamental existential positions that a human being can take. Is there God? Is there eternity? Is our soul eternal? Or is there nothing? And let's just follow this ideology to its very and proper end, which is we should only think about our pleasure and not anything else in this life. Thanks for listening. This is all for chapter 2. We'll read chapter 3 very soon in the next days or weeks. Bye.